Welcome to Democracy 360, an exploration of democracy from every angle presented by the University of Virginia's Karsh Institute of Democracy. My colleagues and I are dedicated to a future that aligns democracy's aspirations and its reality. And rather than just talking about that future, we're actively working to make it happen. Right now, I'm speaking to you from UVA's grounds, founded by Thomas Jefferson in 1819, and our home in Bond House, named for American civil rights leader and UVA faculty member Julian Bond. By virtue of where we work, we're reminded every day that if we don't participate in our democracy, we'll lose it. Our goal with Democracy 360 is to deepen that participation. We hope that the ideas you exchange, viewpoints you hear, and relationships you build during your time with us will strengthen our collective work to build a thriving future. We also hope you'll continue this important work with us and with each other long after Democracy 360 is over. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Aiden.
I'm Lillian.
I'm Lauren.
And I'm Vince. We're with the University Democrats.
And we're with the College Republicans.
While we may not always agree with each other,
we listen to and respect what the other has to say.
If we can engage in respectful debate and dialogue, then so can you.
So be nice, have fun, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Democracy 360.
Good afternoon, happy Friday, and welcome to Democracy 360. It's wonderful to see a few folks here who battled the rain to join us here today at the beautiful Paramount Theater for the inaugural Democracy 360 event. My name is Jamie Swain. I'm President and CEO of VPM, which is the public media organization that serves Central Virginia. And we are proud to be streaming Democracy 360. All the sessions today at the Paramount will be streamed and available on our website at vpm.org/democracy360 and on our YouTube channel so that people beyond this room across the country can participate in these important discussions about the future of our democracy. As public media, we believe in the importance of the free access to exchange of diverse viewpoints and ideas, such as the ones we will hear today. We also take seriously the responsibility to provide trusted, factual news and information so that everyone in the communities we serve can make better informed decisions. While the for-profit model for news faces many challenges, leaving so many communities without a paper of record, public media organizations across the country are investing in local and regional news to fill that void. At VPM, for example, we have tripled the size of our newsroom since I joined in 2019. In fact, we're nearly 30 strong, adding multimedia journalists to cover the topics that matter most to Virginians across the state. In fact, we recently hired a reporter to cover rural health care right here in Charlottesville and the Shenandoah Valley. And I want to commend the Karsh Institute of Democracy for valuing public media's vital role in creating an informed society, which is, I believe, foundational to a healthy democracy, and providing time on the agenda for conversations like the one we're about to hear. Later, you will hear from the iconic former PBS NewsHour anchor Judy Woodruff, as well as current White House NewsHour reporter Laura Barone Lopez about covering the White House, which, as you can imagine, is no small feat. Saturday, NewsHour anchor Amna Nawaz will be here discussing the importance of a global free press, and she's just returning from her incredible coverage in Israel. So our next panel is going to focus on the intersection of public media and democracy. And to tell us more, it's my honor to introduce Krista Acampora. She is the Dean of the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences here at UVA. And under Dean Acampora's leadership, the College of Arts and Sciences delivers a second-to-none undergraduate experience. I can attest to this. I am a graduate at the University of Virginia, and I went to the college. I have a degree in government, and I get the opportunity to interface with so many students. And so I really believe that what the college is doing under Dean Acampora is offering a world-class education, and we're so proud of that. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Krista Acampora.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jamie. It's truly an honor and a privilege to introduce the first main stage event of the day, public media and democracy. Democracy is strengthened when the public has access to reliable and high-quality information. A dynamic and rapidly growing media landscape has created new challenges and opportunities for the public. More outlets can support greater accessibility and representation of new and previously underrepresented voices and perspectives. It can also result in rapid dissemination of misinformation, including deliberate manipulation. A cornerstone of the case for a free press is the conviction that the antidote to the proliferation of falsehoods is more speech, not less. This is reflected in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and its predecessor document, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, authored by UVA's founder, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson put it this way: truth is the proper and sufficient antagonist to error, and has nothing to fear from the conflict unless disarmed of her natural weapons, free argument and debate, errors ceasing to be dangerous when it is permitted freely to contradict them. Today, figuring out what it takes to secure and protect such freedom is truly complex and urgent. Public media safeguards the space for free argument and debate that is so vital to democracy. Investments in public media are investments in the education and civic health of the public. Quality journalism is being delivered at the local level, and we're grateful to feature an esteemed panel of media veterans joining us today. They'll share more about their experiences in local public media. Their conversation will explore innovative news models, the future of journalism, and the connection between public media and a strong democratic public. Margaret Lowe is the CEO of WBUR in Boston and an award-winning producer of high-quality journalism on air, online, on demand, and on stage at CitySpace. Prior to working at WBUR, Lowe was the president of Atlantic Live and had a long career at NPR, where she served as vice president for news. Lauren Williams is co-founder and CEO of Capital B, a nonprofit local news organization serving Black audiences that launched in January 2022. Williams was previously Vox's senior vice president and editor-in-chief, and she has experience working across multiple media from digital to video to podcast. She's also a graduate of the University of Virginia, and we're proud to welcome her back to Charlottesville. Kimi Yoshino is the editor-in-chief of the Baltimore Banner, launched in 2022, where she oversees the newsroom operations, policy, and content. Prior to joining the Banner, Yoshino was the managing editor at the Los Angeles Times, where she worked for 21 years as a reporter, editor, and strategic leader. In 2011, she helped guide the paper's investigation into corruption in the city of Bell, work that was awarded the Pulitzer Gold Medal for public service. They are joined today by their moderator and fellow media expert, Evan Smith, founder and senior editor at the Texas Tribune, and distinguished fellow in journalism at the Karsh Institute of Democracy. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage. Thank you so so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Jamie. Hello, old friends.
Hello.
Good to be with you, and of course, most especially good to be with all of you in the audience. Thank you so much for coming out to support this great event. We have a terrific conversation planned. We're going to go to questions from the audience in a while, but we're going to really dive into many of the things that we all face every day in our business. And I thought we would begin by defining the problem before we actually talk about it. There are a raft of statistics I could cite, Margaret, but I'll just cite a couple to begin. Since 2005, a quarter of the newspapers in this country have shut down. A quarter since 2005. By 2025, a 20-year period, it will be up to a third of all newspapers shut down. Since 2008, 15 years ago, newsroom employment in this country is itself down by more than a quarter. And there are 70 million people, a fifth of the population of the United States, who live someplace with no source of local news or one on the verge of going away. This is legitimately a crisis, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Yeah. Just say a few words about that.
So I think the story of the decline of local news organization is now well known, and the question that we're all faced with is, how do we solve the issue, right? What are the opportunities that we have? And I think not to go immediately to optimism,
right?
But I think in some ways journalism is like love, right? It's going to always be there. It will always sprout up from the grassroots. And there are actually an extraordinary number of people working to preserve quality and independent news across the country. And the biggest challenge we have, or challenges we have, are the threats to democracy and misinformation and disinformation, the seismic technological changes that all of us have to confront.
Right.
The decline of some of the legacy ways that people consume news and information, the different ways, the sort of spread of the way people consume news and information, and ad dollars, which used to be such a mainstay for all of us. And
right.
So, especially in public media, which in some ways has multiple revenue sources, but we can't depend on some of the old things that we depended on for so long. So all of us are confronted with doing quality independent news and at the same time having the resources we need to pay for it.
And being realistic about that list of challenges, all of which we're going to come to. Lauren, that 70 million I referred to, who have no source of news or are about to have no source of news, most of those are in communities of color. The audiences that Capital B was founded to serve and has served so well since you've been in business. Most of that 70 million are folks in communities of color. All of them are in counties where the median household income is below the national average. The people who start behind the starting line of every race start behind the starting line of this one. Talk a little bit about what you've seen of the crisis in the years you've been doing Capital B.
You know, when we talk about the decline of local news from, its heyday, I think the thing that we often forget is that it wasn't ever serving everyone
right.
equitably. And so if you think about this industry that was never serving everyone equitably and is now wildly diminished, we are now in a situation where there's communities that have never been served well who are being served even less well. And so that's sort of the landscape Capital B entered when we launched a little under 2 years ago, and it's an incredibly challenging one to reach audiences that may have just disconnected from the news and disconnected from an industry that seemed to not be for them. And so what we've found is an incredible thirst for information about community, information that isn't just crime, which is often the sort of coverage that a lot of Black communities most likely are to get about their communities, or that's the feedback that we get. And they want to understand how to navigate their communities, what's happening, what the normal civic information is. And because of the lack of resources and lack of, in some cases, interest, from the mainstream media. They aren't getting it and haven't gotten it in a long time. So that's where we're focusing.
And critically, coming out of the pandemic, starting capital B when you did, we saw the racial disparities in access to information during the pandemic have literal life and death consequences in many communities, where misinformation caused people not to have access to health care, not to have access to treatment protocols, opportunity to get vaccinations. Like, this was legitimately an issue during those 2 years.
Right. And I think a historic lack of connection between the institutions and communities meant that just, saying this misinformation isn't true sometimes isn't enough. And you have to build relationships with communities in order for communities to trust what you're saying.
Kimmy, we've talked about misinformation kind of in the abstract with both Margaret and Lauren. It seems to me that we live in two Americas today, one informed and one not. If you're in that 80% of the country that has a local news source, you live in an informed America. If you live in that 20%, you live in an uninformed America, and the consequence of that is that all you have available to you is what's in your feed, literally or existentially, right? And that's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories. That's where that stuff takes hold. And that's the poison coursing through our democracy at the moment, is it not?
Absolutely. But I think the challenge is, even in communities that have local news, how do you get a local community to engage with it so that they are informed, right? Because otherwise they are getting their information from Nextdoor or from, Twitter or Reddit or, from the internet.
Places that you can't say everything you read is reliable and true.
Absolutely.
Increasingly, how can they even find it?
Right.
Right.
And do they even know it's there?
Yeah.
Right, yeah. I mean, we have a media literacy problem, we have a distribution of information problem, right? And of course, we have, sort of at the foundational level, Kimmy, we have a supply problem. Baltimore Banner started in June of 22.
Yep.
In a city of 500,000, in an MSA of 2.7 million, to try to reach people in a community where the legacy newspaper, the Baltimore Sun, iconic in a lot of ways, was simply not reaching enough people to provide that source of information. So you all decided to jump into the water alongside them.
That's right. I mean, I think one of the reasons why we launched there is because the Baltimore Sun is owned by a hedge fund.
Right.
Our founder saw the writing on the wall. He said, this newspaper used to have 450 people. Now it maybe has 70. And this is not going well. And so I think we launched with an effort to supplement what we saw happening there, but also to reach the kinds of communities that we thought had been underserved.
Yeah.
Neighborhoods.
Right. People who had a vested interest in what was going on in their communities.
That's right.
And needed the kind of information that would enable them to unlock the best civic version of themselves. Right. I mean, Margaret, just staying on this question of misinformation for one more second, because it is the thing that I obsess about every day. You and I are old enough to remember. I'm not sure Lauren is. I'm not sure Kimmy is. But you and I are potentially old enough here to remember when Pat Moynihan, the senator from New York State, said that we're all entitled to our own opinions, but we're not entitled to our own facts.
That's right.
He must be spinning in his grave, right?
Right.
We're living in a moment where facts are not facts, truth is not truth, reality is subjective. Right? This is the fundamental problem that all of us on this stage, as we talk about media in the public interest, are trying to solve.
That's right.
More good information to push out the bad.
Right. And part of it, I mean, I think the first order of business for all of us is actually to build trust with people, right?
Yeah.
For people to know if they turn to you and wherever and however, that they trust what they're hearing and learning.
Yeah.
And especially as you're trying to expand the circle and reach more people who you haven't reached before, part of the first act that we all have to do is to build that trust and to get to know people. When we were covering the beginning of the COVID crisis, we went into Chelsea, which is a neighborhood in Boston, where the rates of COVID were wildly high.
Yeah.
And we were one of the first people to break the story of what was unfolding there. And we did a really good job. But then the question becomes, don't always come to Chelsea when we're dying, right? Don't always come to Chelsea to tell that story. There are many more stories to be told here, and that's the lesson, certainly for us, that we have to learn over and over again. There are many more stories to be told, not just the stories of devastation or crime or opioid addiction, but there's a whole world in those worlds.
So just to level set for this audience, I want to do kind of a game show speed round here and ask you some questions about the organizations that you run so that people understand who's talking to them and the context for this. Margaret, WBUR is a public radio station, a licensee of Boston University.
Correct.
Been around for
75 years in 2025.
Coming up on a big anniversary.
75 years.
Annual budget of
45 million.
45 million. Staff size of
About 220 when we're soaking wet.
220. And
It's actually we're there was a period where we were just people were leaving and so, life has stabilized. I hope you've experienced the same thing, but yes.
Yeah. So 220, and of the 220, how many are journalists?
We have about 130 journalists.
In the new,
And that's spread across both our local news division, which is 80 people, and that's reporting and editing and photography and local shows, and then on the order of leaders, and we have a national show which we produce with NPR called Here and Now.
Here and Now.
And On Point, which is another national show.
Right.
Which is a daily exploration of some of the deepest issues of our time, plus a podcast unit.
And the mission is what people who are familiar with public broadcasting, public radio specifically, would recognize. Very familiar, wide range of content that you produce.
That's right.
On subjects that range from the very, very serious and sober to more sort of entertainment, culture, fun.
Well, we believe that people have appetite for every dimension of their lives. I mean, we have a very clear, simple mission, which is to produce high-quality journalism and enriching experiences to deepen understanding, connection, and community for an expanding circle of people, which is an important piece of the puzzle that we're talking about.
It is. Lauren, Capital B is now in its third year in business. Is that right?
Second year live, but third year in business, yes.
Okay. And as you said, I mean, people ask me about Capital B. I'm such an admirer, as you know. I made a gift on the first day because I wanted to support you. I say it's news of, by, and for Black Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Fair?
Yes.
Right. And it's not based in any one geography, right?
Correct.
The theory is that there's an audience all over the country for this.
Mm-hmm.
You have a newsroom in Atlanta.
Yes.
You're about to have a newsroom in Gary, Indiana.
Yes.
And plans to expand beyond that.
Right. We are a local and national hybrid model. So we have a group of journalists who cover national issues, beat reporters who live all over the country and focus not on any specific geographic region. And that sort of is the hub. And then we have really local newsrooms in Atlanta and soon to be in Gary, where those journalists focus specifically on covering those communities. They live in those communities. We have physical newsrooms in those communities, and engage with those communities.
Right. Size of your annual budget is?
Around $5.5 million.
$5.5 million this year? Mm-hmm. Staff size is?
30.
Of those, how many are journalists?
About 75%.
75%.
Yeah.
And again, under the right circumstances, there's unlimited opportunity for an organization like this to serve the public. So, love to grow.
Yes.
Yes. Anybody has any money they want to give to Capital B. Kimmy, the Banner is in an unusual situation.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
The Banner has been in business now for about a year and a half.
We launched in June of 2022.
Right. Your annual budget is?
About 20 million.
20 million.
Yep.
You have a very generous patron.
Right. So we're lucky. We are unusual in the nonprofit space for a couple reasons. We started with $50 million in seed money from our founder, Stuart Bainum. And he had a very big and bold vision, and that was to do scale right out the gate.
Yeah.
And to also have a paywall. So we are nonprofit, but we have a revenue model that includes subscribers, philanthropy, events, and advertising.
It's a nonprofit.
Yes.
But it has a paywall.
Right. So all the money that the organization makes would be fed back into it.
Right. Capital B is free.
Yes.
WBUR Public Radio is free.
Right.
In this case, you've chosen to have a paywall. So I'm going to go back to the time when I was still running the Texas Tribune, and I'm going to quote myself. A public service mission cannot be accomplished behind a paywall. If the goal is to get the kind of information that makes communities healthier, better, stronger, democracy stronger, if the goal is to get more information in front of more people and the first thing you do is erect a barrier between it and them, you're doing it wrong. I said that for years. You all have taken a different approach to this.
Right. We have tried to make the banner available through libraries, public libraries, through Baltimore City schools.
Right.
Looking for ways to provide access in alternative ways. But we also recognize that this is a really difficult media landscape right now. You've got, as you started out saying, newspapers all over the country closing, nonprofits, including your former Texas Tribune, facing layoffs. And so we are a different kind of experiment.
Right. Yeah. And look, I mean, the fact is we all root for one another because whatever works, it's going to make things better. Your staff size today is?
A little over 100, about 75 of which is journalists. 75
journalists in a city of 500,000 and an MSA of 2.7 million.
And what's interesting.
You are a lucky duck, let me tell you what.
Absolutely. We are doing everything we can to try to serve the readers and to, figure out a way to be sustainable.
And you run the gamut.
We do.
I've read about Baltimore city politics, and I've read about the Ravens on your website.
Right.
Like, you really do run from one end of the spectrum to the other.
And they have a great TikTok. You should check it out.
So the premise of this panel is public media and democracy. And of course, I think about public media as media that serves the public interest. That's something that we kind of take as given here. But Margaret, what does it mean to serve the public interest as a news organization?
To provide the closest thing that we can to the truth at every given hour of every given day.
Yep.
And to do it with rigor and depth, to do it with investigative reporting and enterprise reporting, to make sure that our hourly reports and our newsletters actually capture what people need to know now. But what public radio and public media have always been known for is really adding dimension to the stories that we know and giving context. And, I often, any of us in this business know that in order for things to stick to people's ribs, that you also have to tell stories, right?
Yeah.
That the late, great Joan Didion used to say, stories are the reason that we live, effectively, right? And it's what gives us meaning in life. It's what connects people with different points of view to one another, because we're all in some ways probably have much more in common, speaking of democracy, than we have that differs us. And I think the thing that I often talk about, in particular with WBUR, and certainly is true of VPM and Jamie Swain's station and the 250 public radio and PR stations across the country, is there's something enormously powerful about audio and the intimacy of the human voice.
Right.
And it is not just a news organization, but it builds connection and community.
Yeah.
And it keeps people company, and it helps them make sense of the world. The number of notes that we got, especially during the pandemic, which is you are my lifeline. Without you, I would not have.
Well, in a literal sense, you're the only people were locked in their houses. The only voices that they heard came in from their radio. So platform matters, obviously.
Platform matters, and I have enormous respect for all my colleagues who have paywalls, because we're all trying to make a living to serve the public. One of the things I talk about that differentiates us is that we will always be free. So it means that at a time when there are so many haves and so many have-nots, that the have-nots have much less access to quality information.
Right.
So the biggest editorial enterprises on the planet are all subscription. And we are not.
If you don't have a free source of news, you're literally left with what's in your feed, and that's just much harder.
That's right.
Lauren, I talked about truth not being truth. I talked about facts not being facts. There was a time not long ago, we all remember this, when we all started from a basic foundation of information that we at least were willing to stipulate, and then we diverged wildly in many cases from that. I want to ask you, is there even an acceptable definition of the public interest these days? Right, like I'm assuming going into this, well, we're talking about media and the public interest, but if I pulled 5 people out of the, well, maybe this audience would be more agreement. But if I pulled 5 people off of the street of any city, would there be an agreement about what the public interest is?
Probably not.
Isn't that the conundrum that we're all
Yes,
facing?
I mean, I think that is the conundrum. But I think that what our job is to kind of barrel through that a little bit like a freight train, and do the work that needs to be done and make and really flood the zone with it as much as the resources allow. And to add on to what Margaret was saying, in addition to all of the reporting that is in the public interest, I think one of the things that and I think a lot of nonprofit news organizations really think about that's maybe different than some traditional print journalism is not just the reporting side of it, but the sharing of information side of it.
Yes.
The sort of guides, that helping people understand how they can participate in their communities, how they can be civically involved. Not telling them which way they should be civically involved, but really opening up the doors for people to understand their own access to the process. Resources. Right. And I think that that's maybe not historically what a lot of very traditional journalists have seen as their role. Right. And in fact, I was on a panel once and someone asked me if I felt like it was biased helping people to understand like where to vote, or, like, because to that person in this climate, voting had become a partisan.
If you help somebody on your website figure out how to register to vote or figure out where their polling place is, you're biased.
There was someone out there who heard that and was worried that we would be painted as biased for that because of the climate.
Right.
And that's I mean, that answers your question right there.
100%. Kimmy, on this question of serving the public interest, I think a lot about the special obligation that all of us have in serving marginalized communities, underserved communities, communities of color, poor communities. In my state of Texas, rural communities, 3 million people in rural Texas, more than the populations of 18 states, a special responsibility to hit them where they ain't, right? To go to the places where there's not access to information or opportunity and at least try to level people up. That's got to be a focus. I mean, all of us are dealing in some respects with minority-majority communities. Baltimore is a minority-majority city. The populations in Boston, communities of color, a huge part of it. Obviously, you're reaching the black community. In Texas now, the white population is below 40% for the first time. We're all dealing with the change, with the diversity in this country, which is an asset and a strength. And that has to be a special part of our focus in serving the public interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Baltimore is 65% black. And when we launched, we had a certain part of our mission that was not only to be an indispensable news source. It was to unite, inspire, and strengthen. And those words, we take pretty seriously. How can we bring people together? How can we show up? I mean, we talk about building trust. Part of it is just showing up in communities that haven't seen reporters except for when that bad thing happens, right? So, and look, we cover crime, we do that, but we try to also show up when there isn't crime to tell some of those stories. And, I think trust is the only way, building trust is the only way to restore the work that to get people to consume the work that we're doing.
I have to believe critical to this is if you have a news organization that's serving communities of color, let's just stay with that for a second, you've got to reflect back on that diverse community, diversity in your own organization. This has become a major priority for news organizations. Margaret, how do you think about equity in the newsroom, the composition of your staff, the composition of your leadership team in terms of being best able? My position has always been that diversity is not an HR issue in news organizations. It's a journalism issue.
It's a journalism issue. It's a business issue.
Right.
It's like we can't do our jobs unless we reflect the people that we serve.
Yeah.
and we can't do our jobs in terms of journalism. We can't get the best people unless we're diverse. I mean, it is an imperative on every level of every organization. And I do believe that that there's a deeper understanding of that now.
Part of serving the public interest starts with you and yours.
That's right.
Making certain that diversity. Same, Kimmy, I know I've been to your newsroom. You have an enormously diverse news organization reflective of the diversity of the city of Baltimore.
That's right, and we've worked really hard.
Intentionally.
Yeah, really intentionally on it.
And I mean, I would say the nature of Capital B's launch and operations has been that, again, it's of, by, and for Black America.
Yeah, but you know, the Black population in the United States is itself very diverse, and I think we have to make sure that we're being reflective of that in how we're hiring, that we're not, you know, only hiring, you know, people with the same exact type of background.
It's intentional.
Yes.
Yeah.
A strategy. So what does sustainability look like? 45 million, 5.5 million, 20 million, right? So you're all nonprofits. You all raise money from a mix of philanthropic sources and some earned income, but I mean, all of that is kind of gauzy. Having stared at budgets for 13 years, running one of these, I mean, it's earned income, but it's sort of kind of philanthropy too, sort of kind of. I mean, it's all, but I mean, it's a 501c3. Everybody gets a tax letter. Right? Everyone's getting a tax letter, so it may as well all be philanthropy. What does sustainability over the long term look like? People have started, Lauren, to question whether this move to start all these nonprofits to supplement the existing media, the legacy media, whether this is all very quaint and charming and well-intentioned, but it doesn't really have a long-term future. If you're relying on handouts, can you really count on that to sustain you over time? What do you think about that? What does sustainability mean for you?
I mean, sustainability definitely means a diversity of revenue, but I do believe that there are any number of charitable industries, if you will, that are sustainable through handouts, the arts, and you know, many other. We can have a laundry list of them.
Why should nonprofit news be any different?
Why should nonprofit news be any different? It's just a newer one.
Right.
And I think that what we have to do, and I think what we are doing, is educating the philanthropic world about the need for this and is hopelessness too strong a word? The real intense issues of the for-profit model in news. And
I'll note you all worked for for-profit organizations at points in your career. You've seen the other side.
Yes.
Would you take a job running a for-profit news organization these days?
No.
Would you, Kimmy?
No.
Would you, Margaret?
So right behind me is the Atlantic.
The Atlantic logo.
And the Atlantic is the for-profit organization that I worked for.
And we love the Atlantic.
And we love the Atlantic, and it's extraordinary. And in some ways, I mean, I learned so much.
An outlier in a lot of respects.
An outlier and a totally mission-driven commercial enterprise, right? Its purpose is extraordinary singular journalism that will define the age.
What I really meant was, would you run the Boston Globe?
Right.
Let me just say that out
I mean,
loud.
there's probably like 3 I would go. I mean, there's like three out there that I would run.
But the point is, though, that the economic model is not coming back.
No. And if you're going to go to a for-profit model, you want to go to one that has a plan, right? And isn't overly focused on, you know, cutting to meet profitability.
Right. Lauren alluded to what I think is an X factor right now, and that is the moment we're in. The moment we're in. The threats to our democracy are a thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think of the work that we do kind of on a continuum, like it's always been important, it's always critical to do the things we've talked about. But we're really, right now, Margaret, in a now more than ever moment for this kind of work.
We are, and it's interesting because I think about the now more than ever moment, and we all say it. And I think we have to actually give meaning to the now more than ever, because sort of everybody, as they're making pitches and trying to make a case, they're like, this is more important now than ever before. But, I mean, we know that when there is not credible information in somebody's life, that people vote less, that communities are more disengaged, that essentially sort of community and society begins to crumble, and and it is a threat to our democracy. And we are doing everything in our might to make sure that the journalism that we produce reaches as many people as humanly possible. And that's hard. I mean, just that alone requires new technology, staff that none of us have ever hired before. I mean, 20 years ago, we didn't have product teams. We didn't have software. You know, it was a very, very different world. And so we're all having to evolve and build organizations out of whole cloth that didn't exist before.
Well, you're having to put together, like, I'm just thinking about this, knowing a little bit too much in this conversation, you have to put together audience teams.
Correct.
Teams of people whose job it is to make sure that your news organization is not a tree falling in the forest. Mm-hmm. That your content is getting out to people through search, through social media, through careful SEO construction, right? All those methods of distribution become part of the success that you have.
You said something
and all
really
those methods of distribution are changing rapidly.
Every
I mean, there was a story in the New York Times in the last 2 days about how all the social media platforms, which for several years provided an enormous rush of traffic to news organizations, have now completely changed their missions and changed their algorithms, and now traffic, including at the New York Times, and everybody below them in the food chain is plummeting.
Well, and Twitter doesn't even, or X, I should say, doesn't even show headlines
anymore, right? Yeah.
I think you said something really important, and I don't know, Lauren and Kimmy, if you would agree with me, or Evan. I think the whole way that we think about audience now has changed.
Yep.
I mean, as a coming-of-age journalist, it was all, and the reason that diversity was so important in newsrooms is it was all sort of reflective of what you cared about or what you were interested in. It was very internally driven. And now people, I think, embed into the work that we're doing audience at every single turn in a way that
it's not an afterthought.
It's not. It is a forethought. It is at the front of the line,
right,
thinking about audience and the people we serve.
So I want to talk about some things about journalism that are challenges that all of us face, even if we are attempting to innovate and transform the industry in our own organizations. The trust issue has come up. By all measures, this is not a historic level of distrust in the media, but it's pretty darn close. Yeah. Like every day we go in the office, our respective offices, we know the size of the mountain we have to climb, and it's like Kilimanjaro, like it's significant. People inherently don't trust us. Why do you think that is, Kimmy?
I mean, because I don't think we've done right by the public. I mean,
say more about that.
In some ways. I mean, I think Margaret touched on this. We think about what we care about. We haven't actually thought, what is it that how can we serve the reader? How can we provide useful information that the reader needs to know? And with apologies to cable news, I mean, a lot of news today has become opinion driven. And so I think it has become very difficult for people to parse what is fact-based and what is opinion-based. And in today's world, everybody has a platform, and it has become very difficult to separate.
Yeah. Lauren, what do you think? I mean, I'm torn between thinking we did this to ourselves and others did this to us, and we were passively kind of along for the ride.
Well, because I think it's a combination.
Yeah.
You know, I think that I think what Kimmy says is true. I think, you know, we have underserved communities. And I think that we have, and I also think the business issues have, you know, caused the news media to make some choices about scaling back that have, I think, affected this in various ways. But then I also think that there's a political atmosphere that has just worked against us in ways that has not been accurate to what we're putting out. And I think obviously everyone doesn't know that, but I think we on this stage know that.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I think it's important to give voice to that. Over the last 10 years, my table stakes on this would be that people in office, people in positions of power, people who we cover and we hold accountable, because we hold them accountable, have intentionally undermined faith and confidence in all kinds of institutions, beginning with but not limited to the media, for the purpose of allowing themselves at the time that we then hold them accountable to say, see, I told you these people could not be trusted, right? They're doing this knowing that they're undermining confidence in us so that when we report on them, they can say, well, don't listen to that. Those people are untrustworthy. There's certainly been a version of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. at the national level and locally, right? Different people, and it's not one party necessarily, right? It's kind of everybody. But, you know, Margaret, at the same time, we've been doing this long enough to know.
You keep aging me, Evan.
Me too, me too. We're veterans. That's all I'm going to say. We're not humble as an industry. We're too arrogant. We're too defensive. We do a terrible job of walking in other people's shoes. We don't hold ourselves to the same standards. This is in some ways a cell phone.
Yeah.
Right? We did this to ourselves, at least to some degree.
You know, it's interesting, and I think that's right. And I think part of our job is to run towards the feedback and the criticism that we get and not avoid it. And we're sort of at an especially intense moment right now with the war between Israel and Hamas, right? And so we are not only a local news organization, but we produce many hours of national news every single day. And the number of letters we get around this issue.
You're hearing it all the time.
And on this one, more than anything else ever, and maybe even more escalated now, both critiquing us fiercely for a bias, no matter which bias that it is. Occasionally people said, you know, I know you're going to hear from a lot of people saying you're doing a terrible job. I think you're doing an excellent job. And here's $5,000, which is the beauty of.
Wish you got more of those letters.
But what we have done is we have to think really carefully about how we answer those people, and to say we are reading every single solitary letter, getting back to people, not necessarily individually, and also sharing the feedback with our colleagues who are producing different pieces of the journalism. And really being reflective of, oh, you know what, we didn't get that right, and here's why, and being honest about it.
Yeah. Do you take that kind of feedback, Kimmy, to heart? Surely you hear all the time from readers, I didn't like this story, I didn't think you reflected X or Y issue the way that you should have. I mean, I tend to, I try very hard not to be defensive when I hear that stuff, but my back stiffens up. I've never figured out exactly how to solve it.
I mean, absolutely. There's nothing that people like to do more than complain about the media, and I think we're no exception to that. But as a startup and as an organization that is trying to build trust, you have to listen, you have to respond, and frankly, sometimes you have to adjust. And so I think that I keep coming back to that word trust, but that is the most important thing that we can do right now, which is own up to mistakes and change the way you do something if you have to. Or if you're not serving your audience or you're not serving your community, figure out a way to do it.
It's become voguish in our business, Lauren, to do community, this is the phrase used, community journalism. We're going to send people out to the community, and we're going to have them meet with groups, and we're going to have them listen. And we're going to come back to the newsroom with the things that they say are important to them. You're a national organization. Like if you're in Baltimore, or even if you're in Texas, you have there are boundaries around you're sort of doing this every place. How much of that are you doing, and what are you finding? What are you hearing from people as it relates to the trust issue?
Yeah, I mean, we are doing it. We haven't quite figured out how to harness that with our national journalism, but we do have a community listening editor in Atlanta. We do have one in Gary, and we do we have focus groups, do surveys, go to events, they sit at the booths, and a lot of them go to community meeting. A lot of times they go to the community meetings that are we don't have very many reporters, so we can't cover every single meeting, but they'll go to the meetings that we aren't even covering just to talk to the types of people who go to meetings, just to see what their pet issues are and what they're concerned about. And one, tons of story ideas come from that, but two, they're just, getting their ear to the streets. But three, they're also getting feedback. Yeah. The thing that's true of the internet today is a lot of places don't have comments anymore on articles, because of trolls and nastiness, and you have to actually hire a whole person to monitor things like that. And so that feedback loop that earlier in the internet you used to be able to have, where someone would tell you got something wrong in the comments and you could fix it. we've eliminated that because of how nasty the internet is.
Yeah.
And so being able to have that one-to-one relationship, having that person who's out there talking to people is really good. And we've found it to be kind of essential to our ability to go into a community, start a newsroom in a community, particularly as we're talking about the issues of discoverability on the internet. We think that our community engagement editor, like going to a meeting and telling people about capital B, is of enormous value, and more so than having someone find us on Google.
It's raising the visibility of the organization in an audience that should be reading you anyway.
Right.
Margaret, I was listening to the dean quote Jefferson.
Yeah.
And talk about the First Amendment, the importance of the First Amendment. And I was thinking about threats to journalists that now we all confront in our daily lives, the people who work for us, people we know. There were really two kinds of threats. There's the threat to the ability of a news organization to simply do its job.
Right.
Right? I'm focusing in my mind right now on the situation in Kansas of a few months ago, where the police department raided the newspaper, raided the home of the I believe the publisher, and the 90-something-year-old mom had a heart attack and died. It was so this is not abnormal. I mean, it's abnormal to us.
Right.
But increasingly, people in power think they can bully us and limit our industry's ability to simply search for the truth and tell people what we find.
Right. Well, and I mean, I think that's emblematic of the time and emblematic of the divide, and that there are people who are just at every turn diminishing the trust in journalism.
Right.
And what happened in Marion was an extraordinary. It became a poster child for First Amendment. And I have the good fortune to be the vice chair of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And just last week, we honored many people who uphold freedom of the press, and the publisher of the Marion paper was there. And there are not, and you know, the beauty of the Reporters Committee, it used to be that we thought of threats to our journalists only overseas, right? And then suddenly, I mean, not suddenly, it's always been true, but
we're still focused on the Wall Street Journal reporter.
Of course we are, and we honor,
But the idea that now this is coming home to...
And there is physical danger. There certainly was, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, when people were being physically hurt. So our reporters are now in hostile environments at home and under physical danger, and there are threats to our journalism every single day. And so that is, I mean, if you're talking about journalism and democracy, the need to uphold the First Amendment, and for journalism organizations to band together to file amicus briefs. The Reporters Committee has a 24-hour hotline, so any journalist who's under any threat or having an issue can call the Reporters Committee and reach the hotline and get some advice. But it's the intensity of it. There's no question that it's heightened.
I was just going to say, I mean, the editor of the Capital Gazette now works for the Baltimore Banner, and of course this happened in Maryland.
Terrible shooting, five
dead. And, so there are physical threats, of course, but the other one is about access. It's about public records.
Right. The more mundane stuff is that people who are obligated under law to provide public information just ghost us.
And when they are not held accountable, they get away with not turning over records. I mean, when we launched the Baltimore Banner, I tried to hire the first couple reporters that I hired from the Sun, actually, the question they asked me was, will we have a First Amendment attorney?
Will you have our backs?
That's right, because that money was not being spent anymore to fight. And as a result, we had seen tremendously bad behavior in Baltimore, in the state of Maryland, when it came to turning over records and redacting things. And so we've actually been very aggressive on this front. We've sued the state already.
Right.
And, we hope that we're getting things back in line. But there are these other ways that...
And to Margaret's point, there are organizations like the Reporters Committee.
That's right.
where pro bono legal services are being offered by law firms around the country, good actors, to news organizations like yours.
That's right.
Correct.
If you don't have that money in your budget, if you don't have access to the right person, there are people now who are stepping up, thank God, to help us get access to the things that we should already have access to. It's not like we're asking for something we don't have access to.
Right.
It's stuff that by law we should. Lauren, I'm thinking about the other part of this, the other category of threats to journalists these days, and it's not new, is harassment, online harassment in particular, of women, of reporters of color, right? This has become something where newsrooms now have to do trainings for new employees on the subject of what happens if you get harassed online.
Mm-hmm. And we have to sometimes prep if we know a story's coming.
Yeah.
That is going to attract things like that.
Yeah.
That we, prep the reporter, that we counsel them to get offline, that we, have to do all sorts of things to make sure that people are safe. We have people erase all of their information online. It's a reality of being a reporter these days covering these topics.
So the social platforms have actually let the virus out of the test tube as far as this stuff goes, right? They've allowed people under what is effectively the veil of anonymity.
Yes.
To run roughshod over people. And one of the things that has definitely changed with the social platforms is that any hope that the social platforms would police their own platforms, that's gone.
Oh, that is gone. And I'll tell you that what used to be sort of the bare minimum was that when the social platforms had some kind of relationship with journalism and journalists, we would be able to have someone we could reach out to, right, and say, but all those people have been laid off at all these places.
Right.
They don't want anything to do with us at all. And so we are just, we're out on our own.
Right. So I see that we've turned red on the clock, which means that I'm going to remind all of you that you have the opportunity to submit questions. There's a mechanism that I believe you know to do that. There's a QR code. We're going to have students from the University of Virginia ask questions on your behalf here shortly for the last portion of our thing. Before we go to questions, Margaret, on this question of harassment, am I remembering correctly that just recently in New Hampshire?
Yes.
At New Hampshire Public Radio, there was actually
a reporter whose house was vandalized by a subject of their story.
Right.
And that reporter actually happened to live in Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
And they, I'm not going to remember the exact details, but they won the case against that.
Yeah, there was legal action. It actually was a case where it turned out in favor of the
That's right.
journalist.
But what everybody's describing is that news organizations have to be prepared, and on the balls of our feet for all of this stuff.
As if we don't have enough jobs already.
As if you don't have enough jobs already.
So I've gotten, over the last 10 months, as somebody working with other news organizations, to talk to a lot of people running them, big and small and in between. And I always say to them, do you sleep at night? We talked about this last night. Do you sleep through the night? I didn't sleep through the night one night for 13 years. I was up every single night worried about something, worried about many things. So I know what kept me up at night. It was a lot of things. What keeps each of you up at night as you run your organizations? Kimmy first, then Lauren, and then Margaret, and then we'll go to questions from the audience.
No, I do not sleep through the night. And I fear for all of our organizations. How are we going to be sustainable, number one? And number two, how are we going to get people to us, right?
Yeah.
People are disinterested in local news, and they think they are informed if they are watching CNN or if they are watching Fox News.
Right.
And they're missing a whole layer of local information.
Yeah, so that's your concern.
Yeah.
How do I reach the people I need to reach?
That's right.
Lauren, what worries you?
It's the same exact two things, and they're not disconnected, right? The reaching the people and making the money.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, look, we don't want to all be in the business of fundraising all the time, but this stuff will not pay for itself.
Right.
Right, the economics demand that you at least have money coming in the door.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the time.
Margaret?
Well, Evan, you've already outed my age over and over again.
No, I
so
didn't.
I'm teasing you. So it's hard to say whether I don't sleep at night because of being a woman of a certain age. But
Well played, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But there's no question it's the same thing that keeps me up at night. And I go through cycles. I mean, I remember one Christmas season of just sort of dreaming in and out of anxiety about the money, and we're moving in a really good direction, but we still need to get to sustainability.
Right.
But it is, I mean, for me, and I'm sure for it's my number one job. I mean, if I have one job, it is to make sure that WBUR is here for 5 years, 10 years, and 25 years.
And the fact that you are a licensee of the University of Boston University does not necessarily insulate you anymore.
No, it certainly does not. I mean, we're sort of it's almost a deadlift every year, right? I mean, we're raising our money every single year. I will say that we are very fortunate. I mean, we were talking about First Amendment lawyers. Our university lawyers at Boston University, they love WBUR. And
they're pretty good too.
They're really good, and any chance they get to dig into a First Amendment issue or file a suit against a city that hasn't given us their records that we FOIA'd, and they're just, so we have a lot of.
That's an
we're
asset
very
that you
fortunate.
have that maybe the rest actually don't. All right, so we'll go to students now who are going to very generously ask questions on behalf of the audience for the last 15 minutes.
Hello, my name is Joel Elliott. I'm a fourth year here at the University of Virginia studying commerce and history.
Great.
And our first question from the audience is, what do you all believe should be done to deal with monopolies that own multiple newspapers at the local level that dictate what their slant on news may be?
Yeah. Lauren, let me let you weigh in on that first. I mean, there are obviously very large conglomerates that own newspapers all over the country. They have in many cases, or in every case, hollowed out those newsrooms to the point that those newspapers may exist in a technical sense, but they're not actually providing news. Should we break them up? What do we do about that?
I don't know the answer to this question. I know, it's horrible. And I think one of the things that I am not sure of is whether people get it when it happens. Like whether it's sort of like a frog in boiling water for those communities, like they're still getting, do they know that their information is being degraded? And so outside of the sort of policy, the policy solutions, I do wonder if, as like a news industry, if we should do a better job of in those communities helping people to understand that what they're getting is no longer what they're supposed to be getting, and they're being underserved, and if that is helpful in those communities.
Yeah. I mean, I know, Kimmy, that one of the catalysts for the creation of the Banner was the belief that the Sun was not doing an adequate job, right? I mean, a paper like the Sun, they're still publishing a newspaper. They still have some reporters. They're still doing some of the stuff. You could squint at it and think, well, it's the same old Baltimore Sun. It's not.
No, it's not. Though I will say competition among media in any community is good.
Are they your competition?
I think our competition is less the Sun and more, Netflix, more people's attention. But
so it's competition for time, not so much competition for news.
That's right.
Right.
But, I think that having more journalists in a community make it better. Though funny that this question was asked because they are owned by Alden, and I believe
hedge fund.
Just last week or a couple days ago, they ran an op-ed, an unsigned op-ed that may have been written by the owners. I don't know. It was Axios reported.
And it ran in newspapers all over the
every single newspaper they own.
Yeah.
Guest commentary, unsigned.
Yeah.
What was the op-ed?
It was about Israel. Even if you may agree or disagree with it, I think the bigger question, it doesn't matter what the op-ed was, so much as the fact that it seemed as if it was a mandate from ownership, and that is
which is the opposite of local news.
That's right.
Right. Margaret, the Globe is in an unusual situation, right? The Globe is not part of one of those big conglomerates.
No, it's owned by Linda and John Henry, who also own the Red Sox, and my sports fan son will be ashamed of me that I can't remember the soccer team that they own in England. But in any case, they dedicated themselves to lifting the Boston Globe and to making it a sustainable and profitable organization, and they've done a remarkably good job. Brian McGrory, who was the editor-in-chief of the Boston Globe and is now working with the Baltimore Banner, is also at BU and dean of the journalism department, was there and asked the Henrys if they would be willing to buy the paper, and they did. And it's a rare.
Yeah.
It's a very rare situation, and I think people should look to them as a model. And they are a subscription enterprise. In some ways, we benefit from the fact that we're free, and they're not, but they're doing well.
And they're competitors of yours in a literal sense, but you also collaborate with them.
Yeah, they're competitors and collaborators. I mean, we all are. Boston has 2 public radio stations.
Embarrassment of riches.
It's an embarrassment of riches, and we compete for audience, we compete for sponsorship, we compete for philanthropy, and we're really good friends. And we sometimes have some of our investigations published on the front page of the Boston Globe.
Right.
And we like working with them very, very
You have
much.
a much better relationship with the Globe than you all do with the Sun.
Yes, I would say that's probably.
Probably true. Okay. Exactly. Another question from our audience, please.
Manchester United.
Hi, my name is Adrian Mammerl, and I am a master's student in statistics. And a question from the audience that I'd like to focus on is, how do you break the addiction to partisan content that has diminished the power of mainstream news?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about cable news earlier, Kimmy. I'll let you take this first. The idea that the news has become more partisan, it's like, can you really argue with that?
No, and I mean, not to keep blaming social media, but we have self-selected into our own bubbles, right? And media is no different. And I don't. I mean, we would all be a lot richer and a lot more successful if we actually had answers to the last couple of questions that have been asked.
Yeah. But so Margaret, I'm going to take Kimmy's point seriously, but I'm now going to flip it over and say, look, if there wasn't a market for that stuff,
right?
I mean, CNN's had a bad year, peace. But if there wasn't a market for that stuff, MSNBC and Fox, which are really the 2 poles of sorts, I'm not going to acknowledge Newsmax. I'm just going to say MSNBC and Fox, right? Like they're in business and they're successful because people want that. Isn't that just basically them giving people what they want? Maybe we're the
outliers. Can I just nod to the questions that the students are asking?
They're good.
Because they're asking the most existential questions that if we had answers to, we would be in a lot better position.
How do you keep partisanship out of the WBUR newsroom?
I think by prosecuting everything we do, by having really, really strong editors, and by challenging our own assumptions. And look, it's hard. We're producing hours and hours of broadcast shows a day, reams and reams of newsletters, podcasts. We're sort of in a constant. We're sort of in a heavy production mode, and it means setting the right editorial standards. We have our own WBUR ethical guidelines, having leadership that's available and accessible, and making sure that people understand when there's something that's questionable, that they actually pull together a team of people to prosecute the way that we're thinking. Now, you can't do that with every sentence you write or every word you say.
And every human being who works in a news organization is a human being with opinions.
Right, and we all with opinions, and we all make mistakes, right? It's just sort of the nature of our beast, and the idea is to run towards them and to not make people feel badly about it, but to hold a standard about the quality of our journalism that is unassailable.
You don't editorialize or endorse.
We do not editorialize.
You don't editorialize or endorse. Lauren, in some ways, the lack of media literacy in this country, which we can, I think, acknowledge exists, there are people who look at the New York Times and they see the opinion page and they say, well, that New York Times is a liberal newspaper. Well, if you read the New York Times news pages, well, you worked at the LA Times, you know this. People confuse the opinion section and the news section, right? We have a problem by virtue of us not educating people in what our real intentions are that makes this problem worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people just don't understand the news. They don't understand what's happening prime time on MSNBC versus what's happening during the day on MSNBC.
Right.
But I mean, the media is incredibly powerful in this space. I think the media has been incredibly powerful in getting I would say cable TV's mistakes have been incredibly powerful in getting us to this space. But I also think that we are not all powerful. And I think that something has to happen in this country separate from us for us to get out of this. And that is on, leadership in the government, in the highest levels of our government. And that's not something that I think the media necessarily has the power to change. It is a sort of collective thing that needs to happen, and I don't think we have the answer on the stage.
Do you think about this at Capital B, whether the stuff you published has got its thumb on the scale for one side or another? Is that a factor for you?
No. I mean, yeah, we made the choice not to do sort of opinion content, not to do columns, to do reported content, and to base it on, what we're seeing in the communities, what we're hearing in the communities. The fact of the matter is, the majority of the people that we're talking to in the communities that we're covering do lean one way politically, but But within that, there's a lot of diversity, and we are really trying to capture that and make sure that we're not only making choices that reflect, the politics of the staff that we have.
Good. Okay. Another question, please.
Hi, my name is Kyle Riopel. I'm a first-year master's student in the School of Leadership and Public Policy. The next question is, as someone who laments the loss of Google News, what recommendations do you have for news consumers as we try to find the best content and curate what we read, watch, and listen to?
Right.
They add, also the soccer team is Liverpool, but it's better to support Everton.
Okay. So you've been
thank you. I knew somebody would come through.
You've been totally dunked on. I'm going to actually ask for a show of hands. Who misses Google News? Anybody up here?
No, I never really used it.
I mean, the point of the question is excellent because it is this complete, overturning of the mulch online in terms of the way people get information that has really caused all of us distress, right? I mean, it's a pretty significant challenge. So where do you send people other than to individual news organizations directly?
So I think one of the best one of the questions I always ask people, no matter what job they're applying for, is what's your media diet? What do you read?
Yeah, right.
And I think probably one of the most extraordinary ways to consume news these days is actually through newsletters, because you can just get an abundance of reliable quality news into your inbox every day.
And it may be from multiple news organizations.
And it's from multiple news organizations. I mean, I have things that I absolutely go to, but I get newsletters from The Atlantic and The New York Times and BUR, and they're rich. And not only are they filled with important news and information, but they're also linking out to other people. And so there's a way to sort of just expand.
And critically, they come to you as opposed to you having.
And critically, right. I mean, one of the things that the New York Times did was to decide that it was going to be a destination, right? That people were going to come to the Times, and many of us do. But very few of us have that luxury. And so in some ways we have to go to the people and find ways to reach them. And so I'm a voracious reader, listener, not so much of as a news watcher, but there's tons to consume. The hard part is sort of curating your feed so you're getting stuff that you like and that you actually read.
Kimmy, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I kind of like Apple News.
I was going to say the same. That Apple News is my go-to.
Right? Yeah, I mean, taking aside the fact that they also, take money from publishers and, it's not an equal model here.
But the aggregation of content is generally pretty good. I will say I find stuff, discover stuff that I wouldn't have found otherwise because I get that push.
Yeah, I agree. I also look at Apple News.
And people discover us.
Right.
And they're not just, there's a lot of other places where they're not discovering us.
To be honest, as a source of traffic, as a referral source of traffic, Apple News is among the very best.
Yes.
Is it not? Yeah, I agree. Okay, we have time for one more question.
Hello again.
Hello again.
How do you keep a concern for your audience and keep them at the forefront of all you do while ensuring that you're also challenging them and catering to them? Furthermore, how do you keep from being only a mirror for your audience or contributing to a silo effect?
This, Lauren, is something you alluded to earlier. You know, sometimes we have to give our audiences things that they don't know they want or don't know they need.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes when we talk about community listening, that gets misunderstood. Where the idea is that we are in that giving people what they want, that means just, you know, sort of what we're talking about with like a Fox News or something, where we're not telling people that the election wasn't rigged because they don't want to hear that. You know, that's not what we mean by that. We mean we want to hear what people's questions are. We want to hear what people's concerns are so that we can answer them. And we want to be responsive to needs. It doesn't mean that because our audience overwhelmingly voted for the mayor that we're not going to do the tough story on the mayor.
Right.
You know, that's not what it means. So, you know, we want to build trust. We want people to feel like there's an exchange and a dialogue so that when we do the tough story on the mayor, they trust that it was in good faith and not just us being hard on the mayor that they like.
Good. The word end has appeared magically on that screen. So, because I follow instructions, I'm a Boy Scout. Please give Kimmy Yoshino, Lauren Williams, and Margaret Lowe a big hand. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.